Have you ever wondered what happens when the past refuses to stay buried? Well, today on New Things, we're uncovering a royal story that feels less like a fairy tale and more like a secret diary left open by mistake. Because when Markus Anderson, Meghan Markle's closest friend and quiet shadow, finally whispered, "We've always been close, even after Harry," it didn't just break headlines. It shattered illusions. And what you're about to hear may change how you see Meghan's love story forever. Music shifts slightly darker. Before the crown, before the cameras, before she ever became a duchess, there was Markus. Not the prince, not the palace, Markus Anderson, the man who knew every version of Meghan Markle before the world did. He wasn't her boyfriend, at least not officially. But he was something more dangerous, the man who made Meghan Markle who she became. And that, my friends, is where this story begins. They say some people walk into your life like a storm. Markus walked into Meghan's like a strategy. Back then, she was still filming Suits in Toronto, juggling scripts and ambition. He was a Soho House insider, polished, charming, and connected to the people who mattered. Not born rich, but clever enough to blend into the world of those who were. He could open doors, whisper names, and place you in rooms where opportunities were served with champagne. And Meghan? She was ambitious, elegant, and oh so ready to climb. So when these two met, it wasn't love at first sight. It was alignment. She had the drive, he had the access. Together, they were unstoppable. Friends described them as inseparable, finishing each other's sentences, traveling together, always just out of sight. Madrid, Istanbul, London, always in style, always discreet. If Meghan was ever uncertain, Markus was her compass. If she felt lost, he reminded her who she could become. He wasn't just a friend. He was her mirror, her fixer, her quiet architect. And every connection she gained, from producers to designers, often traced back to Markus. He was her social strategist before she ever needed a royal advisor. Then came the year that changed everything, 2016. The glittering web Markus had spun for Meghan led her straight into the path of a prince. It was Markus who arranged her weekend at Soho farmhouse in Oxfordshire, a luxury hideaway where the world's elite mingled far from headlines. And that, according to royal insiders, is exactly where she met Prince Harry for the very first time. Some say it was destiny. Others say it was orchestration. Either way, Markus was at the center of it all, the bridge between Meghan's old life and her royal beginning. When Meghan called him that night after meeting Harry, her voice sparkled. "He's different, Markus," she said. And Markus, ever the strategist, replied with a quiet smile, "Then make sure he sees the version of you the world doesn't." It was advice that would change everything, because it created an illusion both brilliant and fragile. From that moment, Markus stepped into the shadows, not gone, just repositioned. Harry saw Meghan as his escape from royal rigidity. Markus saw her as his masterpiece. And that invisible triangle would soon turn into a royal powder keg. At first, Harry liked Markus. He was charming, smooth, easy to laugh with. But soon, he began to notice something that didn't sit right. The way Meghan's energy shifted when Markus was around, lighter, freer, like she could finally breathe. And for a man already wrestling with insecurities, that feeling grew heavy. Behind palace doors, Markus remained part of Meghan's orbit. He helped with private trips, pre-wedding events, even handled quiet arrangements most friends would never touch. He was there, always there, smiling from the background of her new royal world. By the time the royal wedding arrived in 2018, Markus wasn't just a guest, he was practically family. Seated among the elite, watching the ceremony he had quietly orchestrated. But what no one saw was the invisible thread that still connected him to the bride. The calls. The messages. The private moments that never really stopped. After the wedding, Meghan's world changed overnight. The cameras, the courtiers, the pressure. But when she felt overwhelmed, it wasn't Harry she turned to first. It was Markus. Always Markus. And maybe that's why, when the confession leaked years later, when Markus said, "We've always been close, even after Harry," the world didn't just gasp, it paused. Because deep down, everyone wondered, had Meghan ever truly left her past behind? Or was her marriage built on top of a connection that never really died? And that's just the beginning, ladies. So don't go anywhere, make sure you subscribe to New Things. They say every fairy tale hides a shadow. And for Meghan and Harry, that shadow had a name, Markus Anderson. After his quiet confession slipped into the press, "We've always been close, even after Harry," the world didn't just react. It exploded. Tabloids went into frenzy, experts lined up on morning shows, and even the palace, that fortress of silence, began to tremble. Because this wasn't just another royal rumor. This was a story that rewrote everything. Inside Buckingham Palace, phones rang without pause. Aides scrambled through midnight meetings, statements drafted and shredded before sunrise. One insider whispered to the press, "This isn't gossip anymore, it's a crisis." And in the middle of it all was Meghan, calm, composed, defiant. She called the claims a twisted attempt to destroy her family, but the problem wasn't her words, it was her silence every time Markus's name came up. You see, Markus didn't deny anything. He didn't retract, didn't clarify, he simply vanished. And that silence spoke louder than any scandal. For Prince Harry, though, silence wasn't peace, it was torment. Those who saw him during those days said he was different. Quiet. Distant. He'd walk alone through the gardens of their Montecito mansion for hours, staring out like a man replaying a film only he could see. It wasn't the headlines that hurt him, it was the realization that maybe, just maybe, the story had been true all along. He began to remember things. Small moments that once seemed harmless now felt loaded. The secret calls late at night. The private lunches she brushed off as catching up. The way Meghan's face softened when Markus's name appeared on her phone. And then there was that one night, the message Meghan deleted quickly, saying it was just an old contact. Harry didn't ask again, but he never forgot. Behind closed doors, the cracks began to show. Arguments that started with something trivial, an interview quote, a social post, always found their way back to one name, Markus. Royal insiders later whispered that the shouting in their Montecito home could sometimes be heard outside the gates. A marriage built on love now haunted by doubt. Meanwhile, in London, the palace tried to keep the machine running. The king's advisers demanded silence. Do not fuel the fire, they warned. But the truth was, the fire was already raging. William and Kate, usually silent pillars, were reportedly furious. Not at Meghan, but at the chaos she seemed to bring, again. One senior aide claimed William snapped during a late-night call, "We survived the Oprah storm. But this? This makes us look like fools." Behind the polished smiles and polite statements, the firm was bleeding reputation. And it wasn't Meghan doing the damage, it was Markus. A man who wasn't even royal, who never signed up for the palace code, yet held secrets that could shake centuries of image and control. You see, Markus Anderson wasn't just Meghan's old friend. He had been inside their homes, flown on their planes, sat in rooms where the royals believed they were safe. He knew what others didn't, private habits, conversations, even fears. And when his quiet words reached the press, the monarchy realized something terrifying. He could destroy more with silence than any tell-all ever could. Back in California, Harry was falling apart quietly. Friends said he stopped answering calls, even from old army mates. He'd spend hours pacing, angry at himself, angry at fate. For years, he'd believed Meghan was his redemption. Proof that he could escape the ghosts of his mother's pain. Proof that love could heal the cracks the palace never could. But now, everything felt staged. The fairy tale that once saved him now looked like another script, and Markus was the unseen writer behind it all. One night, as Meghan slept, Harry opened her old laptop, and what he found broke something inside him. A hidden folder of photos from her Toronto years, the dinners, the trips, the laughter, and in nearly every one, there he was. Markus. Always Markus. That night, Harry didn't sleep. By morning, he was gone, checked into a quiet retreat in Aspen, telling aides he needed to breathe. It was the first real distance between them since they'd left the palace. And back in Montecito, Meghan was left alone, surrounded by beauty, but haunted by the one question she couldn't answer. Had she ever really moved on from the man who built her world? As the days turned into weeks, Meghan stayed silent publicly, but the palace didn't. Legal teams began reviewing NDAs, Soho House connections were quietly audited, and private investigators were reportedly hired to trace how Markus's confession had leaked. But nothing could undo the damage. In the public eye, the fairy tale was cracking. The once perfect couple now looked fragile, and every photo, every glance between them was analyzed like evidence. Inside royal circles, whispers grew darker. What else did Markus know? What if he wasn't done talking? And that fear, not the scandal, but the unknown, is what truly shook the crown. Every fairy tale demands a price. For Meghan, it was her peace. For Harry, it was his trust. And for Markus Anderson, the man who lit the match, it was his reputation. By the time the headlines finally began to quiet, the damage had already been done. The confession, the silence, the suspicion, it all left scars too deep for any PR statement to heal. Behind the palace gates, whispers replaced words. And behind closed doors in Montecito, a royal marriage began to rebuild, or at least, pretend to. Harry eventually returned home from Aspen. The cameras caught him smiling beside Meghan again, but those who saw them up close said something had changed. The easy laughter was gone. The trust, once their greatest strength, now felt like glass, ready to shatter at a touch. Insiders claimed Meghan became quieter, almost withdrawn. Her once bright social circle shrank, and those glamorous gatherings with old friends? Gone. She began choosing silence over speculation, privacy over power. As for Markus, he disappeared just as quickly as he'd entered the spotlight. One week he was a headline, the next, a ghost. No interviews, no clarifications, Just the occasional sighting in a quiet London cafe, sipping coffee with that same calm smile, as if he knew the world was still whispering his name. Inside Buckingham Palace, though, silence was not peace. It was strategy. Late-night meetings were held behind closed curtains. Advisors reviewed every piece of communication between Markus and the royal household. Confidentiality contracts were checked, rewritten, reinforced. One senior staffer allegedly said, "This isn't about Meghan anymore. It's about what he might know." Because Markus wasn't just a friend, he'd been inside royal homes, on royal planes, at private dinners where the press never entered. He had seen what few ever could, and that made him dangerous. For a monarchy that has survived centuries on control, one loose end was a threat they could never allow. Meanwhile, public sympathy began to shift again. Some saw Meghan as a victim of betrayal, a woman haunted by her past. Others saw her as the orchestrator, too calculating, too composed. But for many, the truth didn't even matter anymore. Because what the world now saw was the vulnerability behind the glamour. The illusion had cracked. And that, perhaps, was the most shocking truth of all. Markus's simple line, "We've always been close, even after Harry," had done something no royal scandal had managed before. It turned a love story into a mirror. A reflection of how fragile even the most perfect image can be. Behind the scenes, however, forgiveness wasn't so simple. Sources close to the couple said Harry struggled to move forward. Even after therapy, long walks, and family trips, the question never truly left his mind. Had he been chosen for love or for legacy? One night, during a quiet dinner, Harry reportedly asked Meghan directly, "Did you ever love him?" She didn't answer. And maybe that silence said everything. By the following year, Meghan's life looked different. Fewer public appearances. More charity work behind the scenes. Her focus shifted toward motherhood and rebuilding, but those close to her noticed she was always cautious now, always careful about who she let in. Markus, meanwhile, stayed in the shadows. Occasionally spotted at Soho House, always polite, always alone. Some say he was writing a book, others claim he'd been paid to stay quiet. But no one really knows. What everyone does know is that the story changed the way the world saw all of them. It reminded us that behind every royal title, behind every polished interview and curated photo, there are human hearts, fragile, flawed, and far from perfect. And maybe, just maybe, Markus's confession wasn't revenge at all. Maybe it was relief. Because for years, he'd been the keeper of secrets, hers, theirs, and his own. And sometimes, even the most loyal friend gets tired of being silent. Music softens, slow piano with faint strings. When the dust finally settled, the world moved on, at least publicly. But among those who follow the royals closely, this story remains a quiet legend. The tale of the man who shaped a duchess, the prince who lost his peace, and the woman who tried to build her freedom from both. Was Markus telling the truth? Or was it the perfect act of revenge, a final power move from the man who once held all the cards? We may never know. But one thing is certain. In the royal world, silence is never just silence. It's strategy. And sometimes, it's the loudest sound of all. So tell me, ladies, what do you think? Was Markus protecting Meghan, or exposing her? Did he tell the truth, or just twist it to make her fall? Let's talk about it in the comments. And if you love uncovering the real stories behind royal smiles, make sure you subscribe to New Things and hit that bell. Because next time, we're diving into the story of another royal secret that the palace never wanted you to hear.